Have you ever scrolled through social media and felt that familiar sting in your chest? That quiet voice whispering that everyone else seems to have it all figured out while you're still struggling to find your way? You see the perfect vacation photos, the celebration posts, the glowing achievements, and suddenly your own life feels small and insignificant in comparison. This feeling isn't new, my friends. It's as old as humanity itself. In fact, the Buddha spoke about this very suffering over 2,500 years ago, calling it one of the most subtle yet destructive forces that keeps us trapped in cycles of unhappiness. We live in a world that has turned comparison into an art form, where every moment of our lives can be measured against the highlight reels of others. But what if I told you that this poison of comparison, this silent thief of joy, could be transformed into something beautiful? What if the very thing that causes you pain could become your doorway to freedom? Today, I want to share with you an ancient story that holds profound wisdom for our modern hearts. It's the story of a young crow who, like many of us, believed that happiness lived somewhere outside of himself. This crow's journey through the forest of comparison and into the meadow of self-acceptance might just change the way you see yourself forever. You see, in Buddhist teachings, we learn that suffering often comes not from what we lack, but from our constant measuring of ourselves against others. The Buddha called this the second arrow. The first arrow is life's natural challenges, but the second arrow is the story we tell ourselves about how we don't measure up, how we're not enough, how everyone else is somehow better or more blessed than we are. But here's the beautiful truth that this little crow discovered, and that you can discover too. The very qualities you think make you ordinary might actually be your greatest gifts. The very things you wish you could change about yourself might be exactly what the world needs most from you. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let's journey together into an ancient forest where wisdom waits among the branches, and where a young crow is about to learn the most important lesson of his life, a lesson that just might set you free too. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you opened Instagram or Facebook and closed it feeling genuinely happy about your own life? If you're like most of us, that moment is probably harder to remember than we'd like to admit. We live in an age where everyone's best moments are just a swipe away, and somehow, our ordinary Tuesday afternoons can't compete with someone else's tropical vacation or their perfectly plated dinner. This is what the Buddha would have called a modern form of dukkha, that deep, persistent dissatisfaction that comes from always looking outside ourselves for validation, for proof that we matter, for evidence that we're enough. But here's what's fascinating. This isn't really about social media at all. The platforms just amplified something that was already there, something the Buddha recognized 25 centuries ago. You see, the mind has this peculiar habit of turning every experience into a comparison. We can't just enjoy a sunset. We have to measure it against the most beautiful sunset we've ever seen. We can't just celebrate our small victories. We have to stack them up against someone else's achievements. Even our pain isn't allowed to be just our pain. We minimize it because surely others have suffered more. The Buddha taught about what he called the comparing mind, that restless part of us that can never just be present with what is. It's always asking, am I better or worse? Do I have more or less? Am I ahead or behind? And every time we engage with these questions, we step out of the present moment and into a world of mental suffering that doesn't really exist anywhere except in our thoughts. Think about it this way. When you see someone's highlight reel, you're comparing their best moment to your entire reality. You're comparing their carefully curated image to your unfiltered, unedited, beautifully messy human experience. It's like comparing a movie trailer to an entire film, or comparing a single perfect note to a whole symphony. But here's where it gets really interesting from a Buddhist perspective. The suffering doesn't actually come from seeing others succeed or be happy. In fact, there's a beautiful practice called mudita, sympathetic joy, where we learn to genuinely celebrate others' happiness as if it were our own. The suffering comes from the story we tell ourselves about what their happiness means about us. When we see someone's success and feel that pang of inadequacy, we're essentially saying, their joy diminishes mine. Their light makes me darker. There's only so much happiness to go around, and they're taking more than their share. But what if that wasn't true? What if joy, like love, actually multiplied when shared? What if someone else's beautiful life could inspire rather than diminish our own? The Buddha spoke about this as the illusion of separation, the false belief that we are fundamentally separate from each other. competing for limited resources of love, success, and worthiness. But in reality, we're all part of the same fabric of existence, each thread unique and necessary for the whole tapestry to be complete. And this brings us to our story, because in an ancient forest, not so different from the landscape of our own hearts, there lived a young crow who was about to learn this truth in the most profound way. He was about to discover that the very thing he thought was his weakness was actually his greatest strength, and that the happiness he was seeking everywhere else had been resting quietly within him all along. This crow, like so many of us, had forgotten the simple magic of being exactly who he was meant to be. In the heart of an ancient forest, where morning mist danced between towering trees and sunlight filtered through leaves like golden prayers, there lived a young crow. His feathers were the deep, rich black of midnight skies, and his wings were strong enough to carry him anywhere his heart desired. He had keen eyes that could spot the smallest movement from great heights, and a voice that could call across vast distances to connect with his family. But on this particular morning, as our young crow perched on his favorite branch overlooking a crystalline lake, something shifted in his perception. Below him, gliding across the water with what seemed like effortless grace, were the swans, pure white, elegant, moving as if they were dancing with the water itself rather than simply swimming through it. The crow watched, mesmerized, as other forest creatures gathered at the water's edge to admire these magnificent birds. A family of rabbits paused in their morning foraging just to gaze. Even the usually busy squirrels stopped their chatter to watch. And when humans wandered by on the forest path, they would stop, pull out their cameras, and smile with genuine delight. For the first time in his life, our young crow looked down at his own reflection in the still water and felt ordinary. Where the swans were white and pure, he was dark. Where they moved with balletic grace, his own movements suddenly seemed clumsy and utilitarian. Where they drew admiration and awe, he felt invisible, just another black bird among the many. Now, this is such a perfect example of what the Buddha called avidya, a kind of spiritual ignorance where we stop seeing clearly. It's not that our crow suddenly became less beautiful or less capable. Nothing about him had actually changed. But his perception had shifted, and with it, his entire experience of being alive. This is the tragedy of comparison. It literally changes how we see reality. One moment, the crow was simply a crow, perfect in his crowness, content in his strength and freedom. The next moment, he was a failed swan, lacking in all the qualities that seem to matter. Buddhism teaches us about something called tanha, this burning thirst or craving that arises when we become attached to wanting things to be different than they are. Our crow had developed a thirst to be something other than what he was, and like all forms of tanha, this craving became a source of suffering. But here's what's so beautiful and also so heartbreaking about this moment. The crow began to lose touch with all his natural gifts. He stopped noticing how powerfully he could fly, how clearly he could see, how free he was to explore every corner of the forest. Instead, he became fixated on the one thing he could never be, a swan. Isn't this exactly what happens to us? We have our own unique combination of talents, perspectives, and gifts. Maybe you have an incredible ability to make others feel heard and understood. Maybe you see solutions where others see only problems. Maybe you have a way of finding humor in difficult situations, or a capacity for deep compassion, or an artistic vision that's entirely your own. But then we see someone else's gifts, their confidence, their creativity, their success, and suddenly our own treasures become invisible to us. We develop what I like to call gift blindness. We can see everyone else's magic clearly, but we become blind to our own. The Buddha spoke about this as one of the fundamental causes of human suffering, this inability to see ourselves clearly, to recognize our own Buddha nature, our own inherent worth and beauty. When we're caught in comparison, we're essentially saying that the universe made a mistake when it created us. We're suggesting that we should have been made differently, better, more like someone else. But what if every being, including you, including our young crow, was created perfectly for their unique purpose? What if your particular combination of strengths and vulnerabilities, gifts and challenges, was exactly what the world needed from you? Our crow was about to embark on a journey that would teach him this truth. But first, he would have to travel through the valley of seeking external validation, through the desert of trying to be someone else. Because sometimes, the only way to truly appreciate home is to leave it for a while. And so our story continues, with a crow who had forgotten the magic of being exactly who he was, preparing to learn it all over again. With his heart heavy and his confidence shaken, our young crow made a decision that so many of us have made at some point in our lives. He decided to approach those he admired, hoping that perhaps they might share the secret of their apparent happiness, or better yet, accept him into their world of grace and beauty. Taking a deep breath, he flew down to the edge of the lake and perched nervously on a smooth stone. The swans noticed him immediately. After all, his dark feathers stood out starkly against the pristine white of their gathering. One of the swans, elegant neck arched high, glided over with what seemed like mild curiosity mixed with subtle disdain. "Excuse me," the crow began, his voice smaller than usual. "I was wondering, how do you manage to be so admired, so beautiful? Everyone stops to look at you with such joy." The swan's response was swift and cutting, delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from never having questioned one's own worth. "Oh, my dear crow," the swan said, voice dripping with condescension, "this isn't something one learns. One is simply born with elegance, or one isn't. It's really quite simple." Now, from a Buddhist perspective, what we're witnessing here is a profound teaching moment, though neither the crow nor the swan recognized it at the time. The swan's response reveals something that the Buddha would have recognized immediately: the suffering that comes from ego attachment, from building one's identity on external characteristics that are ultimately impermanent. You see, when we derive our sense of worth from things like beauty, status, or admiration, we become like guards protecting a treasure that's constantly under threat. We must constantly defend our position, put down others to elevate ourselves, and live in fear that someday our special qualities might fade or be surpassed. But our crow, in his vulnerability, couldn't see this. All he heard was confirmation of his deepest fear, that some beings are simply born worthy of love and admiration, and others are not. The swan's words hit him like an arrow, but then came what the Buddha called the second arrow, the story the crow told himself about what these words meant. Gathering what little courage remained, the crow asked one more question, perhaps the most important question anyone can ask. "But are you happy?" The silence that followed was profound. The swan turned away without answering, gliding back toward the center of the lake as if the question didn't deserve a response. But in that silence, in that refusal to engage with something so fundamental, there was an answer of sorts. A younger swan nearby let out a laugh that was more bitter than joyful. "A crow wanting to be a swan," it called out. "Now that's truly amusing." And with that, our crow felt something break inside him. Not just his confidence, but his sense of belonging anywhere at all. This moment of rejection is so crucial to understand, because it represents what happens when we seek our validation from external sources. When we ask others to confirm our worth, we give them the power to deny it. When we look for our okayness in the mirror of other people's approval, we become dependent on reflections that may or may not be kind. The Buddha taught extensively about this trap of seeking validation from others. He called it one of the forms of attachment that keeps us bound to suffering. Because here's the thing, even if the swan had been kind, even if it had welcomed the crow still would have been looking outside himself for something that could only truly be found within. But just as our crow felt most alone, most rejected, most convinced that he would never belong anywhere, something beautiful was about to happen. Because the universe, in its infinite wisdom, rarely lets us suffer without also providing exactly the teacher we need at exactly the moment we're ready to learn. From a nearby branch, a pair of wise, patient eyes had been watching this entire exchange. These were the eyes of an old crow, one who had traveled this same path of comparison and rejection many years before. And this elder crow recognized something that our young friend couldn't yet see, that this moment of apparent defeat was actually the beginning of his real journey home to himself. "I've been watching you, young one," came a gentle but strong voice from above. The young crow looked up, startled to see a crow much like himself, but with eyes that held depths of understanding and acceptance he had never encountered before. "I know what you're feeling," the elder continued, "because I too once wanted to be like them. I too once believed that my worth depended on becoming something other than what I was meant to be. And in that moment, something shifted. Not a complete transformation that would come later, but the smallest crack in the wall of despair, letting in the first ray of hope. Because sometimes, the most powerful healing happens When someone who has walked our path simply says, "I understand, and there is another way," the teacher had arrived, just when the student was ready to learn. The old crow settled comfortably on the branch beside our young friend, and there was something so peaceful about his presence that the younger crow felt his racing heart begin to slow. Here was someone who understood, someone who had traveled this difficult path before. "Tell me, wise one," the young crow asked, his voice still heavy with sadness. "What did you discover when you tried to be like them?" The elder's eyes grew distant, as if looking back through years of hard-won wisdom. "I discovered something that changed everything," he said gently. "I learned that sometimes those who shine the brightest on the outside are carrying the heaviest burdens within. And I learned that I had treasures they could only dream of, though I had been completely blind to them." The young crow tilted his head skeptically. "How could that be? Just look at them. They're perfect." "Ah," smiled the elder, "that's exactly what I thought too. But here's what I'm going to ask of you, young friend. Before you give up on yourself completely, go and speak with some of these creatures you admire so much. But don't ask them about their beauty or their grace. Ask them about their happiness. Ask them about their freedom. Listen not just with your ears, but with your heart." Now, what the wise crow was teaching here is a fundamental Buddhist practice, the cultivation of deep listening and compassionate inquiry. Instead of making assumptions based on appearances, he was inviting the young crow to discover the truth that lies beneath the surface of all beings. With a mixture of curiosity and reluctance, our young crow set off on this journey of discovery. His first stop was a vibrant tropical section of the forest, where the most spectacular bird he had ever seen was perched among branches heavy with colorful fruits. This was a parrot whose feathers seemed to contain every color that had ever existed. Brilliant greens that rivaled the forest leaves, reds that blazed like sunset, blues that captured the depth of summer skies. "Hello, beautiful one," the crow called out respectfully. "Might I ask you something? Are you truly happy?" The parrot paused in his preening, and for a moment his bright facade seemed to flicker. "Happy?" he repeated, and then let out a laugh that was more complex than joyful. "Everyone always says I must be happy. They say anyone as colorful and beautiful as me couldn't possibly be anything else. But what do you say?" The crow pressed gently. The parrot's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. "I was captured as a young bird and kept in a golden cage for many years. People would come to stare at me, to admire my colors, to teach me tricks. They fed me well and called me beautiful, but nobody ever asked if I wanted to be there. Nobody ever asked if I missed the sky." The crow felt his heart begin to open with something he hadn't expected. Compassion. "You're free now, though," he observed. "Yes," the parrot nodded, "but some cages are harder to escape than others. Even now, sometimes I dream of those golden bars. Sometimes I catch myself performing, trying to be colorful enough, entertaining enough, beautiful enough to deserve love. The external cage is gone, but the one in my mind, that one takes longer to unlock." This was a profound teaching moment for our crow, though he didn't fully realize it yet. The Buddha spoke often about the cages we create in our minds, the prisons of self-doubt, of trying to be worthy of love instead of recognizing that we already are love itself. Feeling both humbled and curious, the crow continued his journey. In the gardens of an abandoned palace, he came upon a sight that took his breath away. A magnificent peacock was displaying his tail feathers in full glory. Hundreds of iridescent eyes seemed to watch from his plumage, and the colors shifted and danced like living jewels in the afternoon light. A small crowd of forest creatures had gathered to watch, along with a few humans who were taking photographs from a respectful distance. The peacock clearly commanded attention and admiration wherever he went. When the crowd dispersed, the crow approached with the same gentle curiosity. "Magnificent one," he said, "everyone is in awe of your beauty. You must be very happy." The peacock slowly folded his spectacular tail and turned to look at the crow with eyes that held unexpected sadness. "Many desire what I have," he said quietly, "but they don't understand the price of carrying such beauty." "What do you mean?" the crow asked. "These feathers," the peacock sighed, "they're not just for display. Each year, many are plucked from me to decorate hats, to adorn clothing, to sit in vases as ornaments. People see my beauty as something to be possessed, to be taken. And my freedom? I live where others want to exhibit me, not where I want to roam. My beauty has become my prison." The crow was beginning to understand something profound. The Buddha taught about the nature of attachment, how the very things we think will bring us happiness often become sources of suffering. The peacock's extraordinary beauty, instead of being a pure gift, had become a burden. "Don't you see?" the peacock continued. "You fly wherever you wish. You live without anyone trying to capture your essence for their own purposes. You have something I lost long ago, the freedom to simply be, without performance, without exhibition." As the crow flew away from this encounter, his mind was spinning with new understanding. Everything he had envied, the swan's elegance, the parrot's spectacular colors, the peacock's magnificent display, came with prices he had never imagined. Each beautiful creature carried their own forms of suffering, their own challenges, their own secret longings. But more than that, he was beginning to see that what he had always taken for granted, his freedom, his ability to fly unnoticed through the world, his capacity to live authentically without performance, these were actually precious gifts. The Buddha often taught through this kind of investigation, encouraging his students to look deeply beneath the surface of their desires and assumptions. What appears to be desirable often contains the seeds of suffering, while what we take for granted often holds the keys to genuine contentment. Our young crow was discovering that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes it's just a different shade of complexity, with its own challenges and hidden sorrows. And perhaps, just perhaps, his own patch of grass was more beautiful than he had ever realized. With his heart heavy with new understanding and his mind quiet with contemplation, our young crow began the flight home. But this was not the same creature who had left that morning in desperate search of validation. Something fundamental had shifted during his journey. Not dramatic or sudden, but like the gentle turning of seasons, deep and irreversible. As he approached his familiar tree, the very same tree that just hours before had felt ordinary and insignificant, he noticed something extraordinary. The late afternoon sun was filtering through the leaves in the most beautiful way, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the bark. Had this tree always been so magnificent? Had he simply never noticed? He landed on his favorite branch and looked down at the small puddle below that had served as his mirror that morning. But now, instead of seeing inadequacy reflected back at him, he saw something else entirely. He saw strong, sleek feathers that were not just black, but contained within them every color. Deep blues, rich purples, hints of green that caught the light like hidden jewels. He saw eyes that were bright and intelligent, capable of perceiving details that others might miss. He saw wings that were built not for graceful floating on water, but for powerful flight through wind and weather, for covering vast distances, for the kind of freedom that cannot be caged or contained. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, our crow felt something that the Buddha would have recognized as mudita, that pure joy that comes from appreciating what is, exactly as it is, without the need for it to be anything else. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of Buddhist awakening. It's not about becoming someone different or acquiring something new. It's about removing the layers of false perception that have been covering our true nature all along. Our crow was experiencing what we might call original vision, seeing himself as he actually was, rather than through the distorted lens of comparison. He thought about the parrot, trapped for so long in that golden cage, performing for others' pleasure. Here he was, completely free to come and go as he pleased, accountable to no one, able to explore every corner of his world without restriction. When had he stopped appreciating this incredible gift? He thought about the peacock, burdened by beauty that had become a commodity, unable to live quietly and authentically because of others' constant attention. Our crow could live his entire life without a single photograph being taken of him, without anyone trying to possess or exhibit his essence. What an extraordinary blessing that was. And the swans, so admired but so bound by the expectations of their elegance, always performing their grace for an audience. Our crow could be clumsy if he felt like it, could hop awkwardly on the ground, could make ungraceful landings without disappointing anyone's image of what he should be. The Buddha spoke often about this kind of awakening, the moment when we stop seeing our ordinariness as a problem and start recognizing it as a profound gift. Most of us spend so much energy trying to be special, trying to stand out, trying to be worthy of attention and admiration. But there's a deep peace that comes from embracing what he called precious ordinariness, the beauty of being exactly who we are without apology or performance. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors that rivaled even the peacock's plumage. Our crow did something he hadn't done in far too long. He sang. Not because anyone was listening, not because his song was particularly beautiful or noteworthy, but simply because he felt like singing. His voice was not melodious like a nightingale's, nor powerful like an eagle's call. It was simply the sound of a crow being authentically, unapologetically himself. And in that moment, it was the most beautiful sound in the entire forest, because it was true. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about the end of dukkha, the end of suffering that comes from wanting reality to be different than it is. Our crow was no longer suffering because he wasn't a swan. He was celebrating because he was exactly, perfectly, completely himself. He spread his wings wide, feeling the strength in them, feeling the way they caught the evening breeze. These wings had carried him on his journey of discovery. These wings would carry him on countless adventures yet to come. These wings were his wings, and they were exactly right. From somewhere in the distance, he could hear the old crow's gentle call, a sound of approval, of recognition, of one awakened being acknowledging another's moment of seeing clearly. The teacher's work was done, but the celebration was just beginning. As the first star appeared in the darkening sky, our crow settled onto his branch with a heart full of gratitude. He was grateful for his journey, grateful for his pain, grateful for his awakening, and most of all, grateful for the extraordinary gift of being ordinary, authentic, and completely perfectly himself. The comparison trap had released its hold, and in its place grew something infinitely more valuable: self-acceptance, self-compassion, and the deep, abiding peace that comes from finally coming home to yourself. And so, dear friends, we come to the heart of why this ancient story speaks so powerfully to our modern lives. Our young crow's journey from comparison to self-acceptance isn't just a beautiful tale. It's a roadmap for anyone who has ever felt inadequate while scrolling through the highlight reels of others' lives. You see, each of us carries within us both the young crow and the wise elder. We have the part of us that gets caught in the comparison trap, measuring our behind-the-scenes reality against everyone else's carefully curated presentation. But we also have that deeper wisdom that knows, on some level, that true happiness has never come from being someone else. The Buddha taught that one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is what he called loving awareness, the ability to catch ourselves in the moment when we start spinning stories about our inadequacy. Imagine if, the next time you felt that familiar pang of not enough while looking at someone else's success, you could pause and ask yourself the same question our crow learned to ask. What story am I telling myself right now? What am I assuming about their life that I don't actually know? Here's a beautiful practice you might try. When you notice yourself comparing, instead of pushing the feeling away, get curious about it. Thank that part of you for trying to protect you, for trying to help you fit in and belong. Then gently redirect your attention to something you're genuinely grateful for in your own life. Not something big or Instagram-worthy, but something real and present. Maybe it's the freedom to drink your coffee slowly in the morning without anyone watching. Maybe it's the way your friend's face lights up when you make them laugh. Maybe it's your ability to find beauty in small moments that others might overlook. These ordinary miracles are often invisible to us when we're caught up in comparison, but they're the actual substance of a meaningful life. The crow story teaches us something profound about what the Buddha called metta, loving kindness that begins with ourselves. When we can look at our own reflection with the same compassion we'd offer a dear friend, when we can appreciate our own unique combination of strengths and vulnerabilities, we naturally start extending that same acceptance to others. Think about it. When you're secure in your own worth, others' success doesn't threaten you. In fact, it can inspire you. When you know that your value doesn't depend on being better than anyone else, you're free to celebrate their joy without diminishing your own. This is the beautiful practice of mudita, sympathetic joy, where another person's happiness becomes a source of your own happiness. But perhaps the most profound teaching from our crow's journey is this: the very qualities you think make you ordinary might actually be your greatest gifts to the world. Your sensitivity that you sometimes see as weakness, it might be exactly what allows you to offer comfort to others in ways that more confident people cannot. Your tendency to think deeply before speaking? In a world full of noise, your thoughtful words might be exactly what someone needs to hear. The Buddha often spoke about our original face, who we were before we learned to compare ourselves to others, before we developed strategies for fitting in or standing out. Our young crow found his original face reflected in that puddle at the end of his journey. He saw himself clearly, without the distortion of comparison, and what he found was not perfect by anyone else's standards, but it was perfectly, authentically him. As we close this story together, I want to leave you with this thought. Somewhere right now, someone is looking at your life, your particular combination of challenges and gifts, your unique way of moving through the world, your specific brand of humor or wisdom or creativity, and they're thinking, I wish I could be more like them. You are someone else's inspiration even if you never know it. You are someone else's example of courage, of kindness, of resilience. The very things about yourself that you take for granted or even criticize might be exactly what gives hope to another heart that's struggling. So tonight, as you settle into sleep, I invite you to rest in the same peace our crow found at the end of his journey. You don't need to be anyone other than exactly who you are. You don't need to prove your worth or earn your place in this world. Like our crow, you are already whole, already valuable, already perfect in your imperfection. Your song, however it sounds, whatever form it takes, is needed in this world. Not because it's better than anyone else's song, but because it's uniquely, authentically yours. And in a world full of performances and pretending, your authentic voice is one of the most precious gifts you can offer. Rest well, dear friends. Rest in the knowing that you are enough, just as you are, right here, right now. The forest of your life is beautiful exactly as it is, and you, magnificent, ordinary, extraordinary being, are its perfect inhabitant. May you wake tomorrow with the eyes of our awakened crow, seeing your own reflection with love, and may you carry that loving vision with you wherever your wings may take you.